Hello, YouTube. Welcome back. You may notice I'm a bit more dressed than I was before, but yeah, it's just because it's a work day. I am working from home these days, of course, so I have to wear a tie once in a while for meetings and things like that. But anyway, I want to talk about this book, Yawar Fiesta by José María Arguedas. Um, I just finished reading. I just finished reading this yesterday, and I'd like to give my reaction and discuss a few of the things that are going on in this book because I think there's a lot of there's a lot here to interest well, sort of the general reader, but there's a lot that's a bit more specialized, and I think it's it's definitely an interesting book. By the way, this is the English translation by Frances Horning Barraclough, um, and she does a pretty good job, I have to say. I'm not 100% on board with the book as a whole, and I'm not sure how much of that is Arguedas and how much of that is Barraclough. But given the challenges that this book must present to a translator, I have to give it to her. She captures something of it quite well. So, Yawar Fiesta, basically, it's the story of a traditional festival. Yawar Fiesta, Fiesta, of course, is festival in Spanish, and Yawar is blood in Quechua. So this is the blood festival, or the bloody festival, I suppose, would probably be a better translation. But it's called that because the centerpiece of the festival is a bullfight, and this is the story of a kind of a conflict related to modernization, because the traditional Peruvian highland Andean bullfight involved a whole crowd of people kind of storming in, and anyone who was brave enough could take on the bull. And there were fireworks and dynamite and multiple people being gored or killed. At least that's how it's described in this book. I've never actually seen one. I've been to Peru and I've been to the highlands where this book takes place, but I didn't go to a bullfight, unfortunately. Or fortunately, maybe I don't want to see something that kind of bloody. But anyway, so what's going on here is there is a new sub-prefect in the town of Puquio. He's the new representative of the Central Peruvian government, and he is kind of terrified or disgusted, I suppose is probably a better way of putting it, by what he views as the backwards, you know, savage, if you'll forgive the word, expression of the local culture that he can see in, or that you can see in this bullfight. And he puts out a decree from the government banning the this backwards custom, backwards in quotes, of course, and replacing it with a Spanish style bullfight, where going to they're going to hire a professional bullfighter from Lima, from the capital, to come and do a Spanish style bullfight instead of this local community tradition. And naturally, this meets with a lot of pushback. Um, some of the pushback does come from the a few of the higher ups in the town that are not willing to go along with it. Notably, uh, let's see, his name was Don Julio Arangena, is the main uh, upper class person who's resistant to this change. But the majority of the pushback comes from the common people, the lower class, which leads to a really interesting sort of class and political struggle going on here. Um, but overall, the majority of the ruling class uh, goes along with it. And um, the other side that goes along with it is the educated children of the lower and middle class who have gone off to school in Lima and have been enlightened. And they are dead set against this tradition because they see it as an exploitative tradition where the indigenous people, the local native peoples, throw themselves at the bull and are brutally slaughtered for the entertainment of the rich. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic because on the one hand, we have Don Julian, Don Julian, who is uh, he himself characterizes himself as the most exploitative of all of the landlords. And yet he is siding with the local indigenous people who don't want their traditions to be destroyed by the central government. And on the other hand, we have the remainder of the landlords, the central government, and they're siding with these, um, you know, what they how they perceive them as educated upstarts who are having ideas above their station and hope to elevate themselves and also their local community. So almost like a quasi-socialist group are siding with the landlords against the will of the local people. And it's a really interesting dynamic that, as I said in my last video when I talked about this book a little bit, politics makes strange bedfellows, and sometimes people will agree to agree to a principle for different reasons. In this case, uh, the educated students or the educated left-wing students from Lima, uh, they want to get rid of this tradition because they think it exploits the people, whereas the central government and the landlords want to get rid of the tradition because they think it's a backwards remnant of a pre-Christian era. And on the other hand, Don Julian and a few other elites who support the tradition want to keep it for essentially for the reason that the educated students believe that it's a bad thing, that it is kind of an well, it's entertainment for them. They see it as part of their culture is watching this brutality. But on the other hand, the ordinary people, the ordinary indigenous people from the Aylus or Ayus, I'm not sure how it's pronounced because it's a Quechua word, not a Spanish word, um, want to keep the tradition because it is a way of holding on to their, you know, Andean culture, their unique highland culture that in many ways it really is a syncretic culture. It involves Catholicism and sort of the wider Peruvianism or Peruvian uh, culture and ideology, but it is older than that. It is in many ways a carryover from the Inca era, from the pre-colonial era, and these kinds of conflicting ideologies mixing and matching together are really interesting to me. The other thing that is interesting to me about this book is the way it uses language, because um, Arguedas, he could speak both Spanish and Quechua, the indigenous language of southern Peru, which was the language of the Inca Empire. And he wanted to sort of imbue the rhythms of Quechua into the Spanish of his novel. And of course, if you want to mix one language into another language, that's challenging enough already. If you want to take that resulting mixture and translate it into still a third language, English, that's going to be even more different. Excuse me, even more difficult. And I think that's one of the reasons why this particular book it's a little bit of a challenging read, even though it's not very long. The actual syntax and sentence structure is not complex or anything like that, but it's a challenging read because it sounds somewhat stilted and forced. And I think part of that is this weird interaction going on between these three languages, Quechua, Spanish, and English. And I I have to give Frances Horning Barraclough credit because she put in her best effort. I'm not sure I would say it's 100% successful, but it's definitely makes for interesting reading. So another aspect of this book that I think is really interesting is the other texts that are included along with it, because one thing that Arguedas was a poet. He was a novelist, of course, and he was also an ethnologist. He studied the indigenous people of the highlands of Peru. That's why he was able to speak fluent Quechua, so fluent, in fact, that he wrote much of his poetry in Quechua. Um, and some of that ethnographic material is included here. The After the book is, or sorry, after the novel, we have Pukio, A Culture in Process of Change, which is kind of an academic study of the religious syncretism of the Pukio region, and you know, in real life, it's not a fictitious thing. It's not a fictitious thing. But what's really interesting about that is that it truly is a syncretic religion. It's not strict Catholicism. They do talk about believing that God created the universe, but they also talk about the belief that the Wamanis create the universe, or that the god Ikari or Inkari created the universe and the Wamanis run it, and that the water and the land and the animals are the gifts from the Wamani to the people. So there's this interesting kind of a collaboration between Spanish Catholic culture and religion and the old pre-colonial Inca religion that still holds on, in at least at this time. And to an extent, it still holds on to the present day. About, I guess now, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I spent some time traveling around South America, and that was one of the things that really struck me in Peru. Uh, was how present the pre-colonial era felt. You could walk around the streets of places like um, Chachapoyas and or Cusco, and you can see you know, street signs in Quechua or Aymara, bilingual schools, people flying the Inca flag or the Inca banner, and it's really interesting that the culture is very much still alive. Even though if you ask the majority of people what's your religion, probably they would say Spanish. If you ask what's your nationality, they would most certainly say Peruvian. But they still have this idea that they are distinct and the culture is distinct. And I think that really comes through in this book, both in the academic texts that are included as an afterword and in the novel itself. In addition to that, in as a foreword, we have the novel on the problem of literary expression in Peru, also written by Arguedas himself. This was originally published as an article in a literary magazine from, in 1950 from Lima, that highlights the unique situation that Peru is in of having this ancient civilization that in many ways is the equal to the Spanish civilization and drawing from both sides to make this unique modern culture. And what we're seeing in this novel is the coming to terms between these two cultures and the forging of something new. One thing that I thought was really interesting related to that is was in the in the afterword, in the section about Pukio in the modern times, it talks about the native people, the indigenous people, setting a goal of having their children be mestizo. Now, mestizo, if you're not familiar, is Spanish for mixed, and essentially it refers to the the mixture of indigenous people and European Spanish settlers who form the who now, as a mixed race population, form the majority in most of Latin America. Uh, and so when you first read this, if you're familiar with this term, especially if you're familiar with this term as I am from a Mexican context or a Mexican American context, it might sound a little strange that, these people, they want their children to be mixed race. Well, okay, there's an easy way to do that. It's, find a boyfriend or girlfriend of the other race. But that's not what they mean here. What they mean here is mestizo as a middle class. They want to they want their children to become mestizo in terms of cultural signifiers and economic benefits, not necessarily in terms of actual race or physical, well, phenotypes or anything like that. Uh, it's cultural signifiers that they're interested in. And that radically changes both the meaning of the word mestizo, but also our understanding of it. And that's kind of the process that we're seeing here, especially with the characters of the students who go off to Lima. Some of them are mestizo themselves, some of them are indigenous people, but when they go to Lima, when they study, when they get these ideas from the university, when they come home, they are mestizo in the sense of having these cultural signifiers, having this social status that can elevate them in society. They're able to talk to the traditional elite landowners as equals. Um, at one point, there's a really dramatic scene where one of the students who works in Lima as a chauffeur, uh, he calls Don Julian, who's again one of the prominent local landowners, he calls him a thief to his face. And everyone, including Don Julian's rivals among the landed gentry of the town, are shocked by this. And it's because regardless of who you agree with on the situation with the bullfight, regardless of whether you want to preserve the old Andean customs, as Don Julian does, or whether you want to get rid of them and move on, as this particular student does, you can see the process of democratization that's going on here, where uh, previously disenfranchised people are able now to express their opinions and express their desires in a way that they simply could not before. Now, whether the outcome, uh, the bullfight being banned or the bullfight going on as it has for hundreds of years, whatever the outcome of that, this change in social structure is the real key point here. And I think that's a really fascinating thing. And also, I have to say, I love the bull. The bull is called Mesitu, and for most of it, he's a figure of mystery. He sits in his he sits in the shrubs in the high altiplano, and is just kind of a mythical monster waiting to get the people. And then when he's dragged into the town, uh, finally by the will of the local indigenous people, um, all of that mystique disappears. And it's a really shocking moment of, you know, basically the world losing some of its magic. And I think those two points here are at the heart of this book. The world is losing its magic, but at the same time, the world is becoming more open to the ordinary people who before were not able to share in the benefits of the society. So if that sounds interesting to you, this is definitely a book to read. I really do recommend it, even if the language can be a bit stilted and a bit difficult to get through at times. So yeah, Yawar Fiesta, Jose Maria Arguedas, read it. And if you like this and if you would like me to continue, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you don't like, comment, and subscribe, to be honest, I'm still going to continue because I had fun today and this seems like a nice hobby and it seems like a good way to keep me in the habit of reading and doing something creative. So thank you, YouTube. Have a good afternoon. I hope your quarantine is going well. See you next time.